Hey, Alexander. This topic today is the supply chain ecosystem. And my first question is, can you talk about what is this supply chain ecosystem and why is it important?
Regards for you, Mr. Dustin, at the beginning. And before I said what is supply chain ecosystem, we have to know what is the major question we have to answer. Uh, every person who wants to run a business has to have some kind of wish to do some business in a certain way. That certain way means, in that sense, to have a track of what our business are and what are connections with the other industries, resources, etc. In that sense, uh, in short, the ecosystem model is a framework to visualize all operational strategic management and execution issues. That would be in short. But to really understand the supply chain ecosystem, we have to be in some kind of reasoning that if we want to design supply chain, we have to think globally. And when we want to design a globally supply chain, we have to do two major steps. Those steps are global supply chain formation, and the second major step is building governance mechanisms or frameworks for partner selection, coordination, and control. When we talk about the first step, global supply chain formation, that step has additional 5 steps. And the first steps of those is to map supply chain ecosystem for the industry vertical. Now, when we know what is supply chain ecosystem in global, we can say what it is in certain way. So the supply chain ecosystem consists of 4 major parts, and those are supply chain, resources, institutions, and delivery services mechanisms. So every person who wants to run a business have to think about those 4 major parts if he wants to mitigate risks, and that would be in some kind, in short way, said.
Can you talk about how it's implemented and what are some of the risks involved?
Well, anybody who wants to implement supply chain in their business should think about those 4 steps, especially for micro and middle scale organizations. And this is intention for them, because large companies have teams of people who work on those issues, but micro and middle scale companies don't have that experience, and those questions are here to help them to mitigate their own risks, but not only for them. Or a larger company can do better with this supply chain ecosystem as well. But risks are especially in those I would say in those 4 parts I mentioned. If you talk about resources, what are the risks? Risks are, for example, what kind of talents do we have, or what kind of resources, as what are, for example, financial resources or natural resources. When we talk about natural resources, do we have enough iron, for example, for doing our job? In that sense, we have to make a framework to really understand where our risks can pop up, and we have to identify those risks by mapping our supply chain ecosystem, then to mitigate him, and finally to manage or make enhance those risks and compete in some kind of way.
What are some of the results you can expect from supply chain ecosystem?
Those results are really huge. I will mention some examples. Some companies didn't done their homework and they failed. So I will mention one example, such as Land Rover. That company has contract manufacturer, and that manufacturer bring them chassis for their cars. But they didn't realize that in a contract they made one mistake, and that mistake was if there is a sole manufacturer who gives them a chassis, and if that manufacturer broke down, the Land Rover must give them money to so they can work in future. In that sense, what is the mistake of Land Rover? Land Rover didn't read the contract, and they made that let's say mistake. In that sense, we have to understand that every problem that appears is in our people we are doing with, and of course in a way that we are doing. I just want to mention it in a way that we should be really aware of what we are doing in a what way. So our supply chain ecosystems just give us idea where that problem could be. So if anybody wants additional explanation of any system, that person should employ some specialist in that service. So that's be the most general answer.
Thanks, and can you provide us with a brief background of yourself?
Well, I'm a logistics and supply chain professionals in military in Serbia, and I do all the jobs related to logistics, transportation, maintenance, health and insurance. So I have a general experience of all related areas to run a business.